Here's something that should keep you up at night. Right now, in the richest country in the history of human civilization, 1 in 3 Americans can't cover an unexpected $400 expense. Not a car payment, not a medical bill, $400. The price of a cheap hotel room for a weekend. That's the financial cliff that tens of millions of people are standing on, one bad day away from falling completely off. And the scary part? That number hasn't gotten better. It's gotten worse every single year since they started tracking it. But we're not talking about some fringe economic report here. We're talking about the Federal Reserve's own data, the government's own numbers, the system measuring itself and still admitting it's broken. So ask yourself this: if America is so powerful, so wealthy, so exceptional, why does it feel like the floor is giving out underneath everyone you know? Because here's the thing nobody in a suit on cable news will say out loud. This isn't a temporary dip. This isn't a bad cycle that'll bounce back after the next election. What's happening in America in 2026 isn't a recession. It's something slower, something quieter, and something far more dangerous than a crash. Crashes you can see coming. You can brace for them. What's unfolding right now is different. It's a structural unraveling, the kind that happens in the background, invisible until... Let's talk about something they don't put on the news ticker. The American middle class, the engine, the backbone, the whole mythology of the country has been shrinking for 50 straight years. Not crumbling suddenly, shrinking, slowly, quietly. Like a glacier melting in real time while everyone argues about the weather. In 1971, 61% of Americans lived in middle-income households. By 2023, that number had dropped to 51%. That's tens of millions of people who slid either up or more commonly down, out of the class that was supposed to define what America was. And those people didn't disappear. They ended up somewhere. Most of them ended up working 2 jobs, skipping doctor's visits, and telling their kids that things are fine. You want to know what's really wild? Wages, adjusted for inflation, have barely moved in 40 years. 40 years! Your grandfather worked a factory job in 1985 and bought a house, raised 3 kids, and took a vacation every summer. You've got a college degree, a LinkedIn profile, and a side hustle, and you're splitting rent with a roommate at 32. That's not a personal failure. That's a system that stopped working for regular people a long time ago. But here's where it gets darker, because income stagnation is just the symptom. The disease runs deeper into the infrastructure, the institutions, Let's talk about something they don't put on the news ticker. The American middle class, the engine, the backbone, the whole mythology of the revival. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives the United States infrastructure a C-. A C-. That's the grade of a student who shows up, does the bare minimum, and is one bad test away from failing the class. Except this isn't a class. This is 45,000 bridges rated structurally deficient. This is 6 billion gallons of clean water lost every single day through leaking pipes. Pipes in some cities that were laid before World War I. This is a power grid that experts have been warning about for 2 decades, creaking under the pressure of extreme weather that keeps getting more extreme. In 2021, Texas, the state that built its entire identity around independence and self-sufficiency, had its power grid collapse in a winter storm. Over 200 people died. In America, in the 21st century, from the cold? Because the infrastructure failed? And the response? Investigations, hearings, promises. Then, mostly, silence. Here's what nobody wants to sit with. Rebuilding America's infrastructure to the level it actually needs would cost somewhere between $2 and $6 trillion over the next decade. That's not a talking point.
That's the American Society of Civil Engineers' own estimate. And even with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed in 2021, experts say the funding covers maybe a fraction of what's actually required. So you're living in a country where the physical foundation, the roads, the water, the electricity, the bridges you drive over every single morning is deteriorating.
Trust is the invisible currency of civilization. You don't think about it until it's gone. And right now in America, it's almost gone. Gallup has been tracking American confidence in institutions for decades. Congress, the Supreme Court, banks, the media, the presidency, the police. Across the board, trust has been in free fall. In 2023, confidence in Congress hit 8%. 8%! You could survey a random Applebee's on a Tuesday and probably get higher approval ratings for the breadsticks. But this isn't a punchline. This is catastrophic because modern societies don't run on tanks and missiles. They run on the belief that the system, however flawed, is still basically legitimate, that elections matter, that courts are fair, that institutions, at some level, trying to work for you. When that belief collapses, everything becomes negotiable. Rules become optional, and the social contract, the unspoken agreement that holds 330 million strangers together in one functioning nation, starts to dissolve. Look at the political polarization numbers, and it gets worse. Studies from the Pew Research Center show that the ideological gap between Democrats and Republicans is now wider than at any point in modern American history. We're not talking about people who disagree on policy anymore. We're talking about people who increasingly believe that the other side is not just wrong, but dangerous, immoral, a genuine threat to the country's survival. That's not democracy under stress. That's democracy under siege from the inside. And here's the part that genuinely haunts researchers who study societal collapse. Historically, Here's the thing about collapse. It never looks like the movies. There's no single explosion, no moment where a newscaster grabs their earpiece and says, "We're getting reports that America has fallen." It looks like your friend who stopped voting because he doesn't believe it changes anything. It looks like the emergency room that closed in your town because it wasn't profitable. It looks like the highway that keeps getting patched but never actually fixed. It looks like people who work full-time and still qualify for food assistance. It looks like normal, just slightly worse than it was last year, and slightly worse than that the year before. Historians call it elite overproduction. When a society generates more ambitious, educated people than the system has room for at the top, you get a generation of people who were told they'd make it if they worked hard enough, followed the rules, got the degrees, and then discovered the ladder had been pulled up. That kind of disappointment doesn't just create economic anxiety, it creates rage, and rage, historically, doesn't stay quiet forever. Rome didn't fall in a day, neither did the Ottoman Empire, or the British Empire, or the Soviet Union. They all fell through the same slow process: institutional rot, economic inequality, loss of civic faith, and a leadership class that kept telling people everything was fine right up until it wasn't. None of that means America is finished. Civilizations have pulled back from the edge before. The New Deal didn't just fix an economy, it rebuilt a broken covenant between a government and its people. It's been done. It can be done again. But it requires something that feels almost radical right now: honesty. The willingness to look at what's actually happening, not what we wish were happening, not what makes for a better campaign ad, and say, this is real, this is serious, and we are running out of time to fix it. Because here's the truth that no politician will say on a debate stage, and no cable news host will lead with at night.